Hey everyone! If you've been following me for a while, you've probably seen the short film that I put out just last week called What I Learned From Detransition. If you haven't, I highly recommend that you check it out. I'll have it posted up here, and if I can't quite figure out how to do that, I'll definitely have it listed in the description below. Now, the short film documents what has been a very challenging year navigating detransition, one that I did choose, but I didn't initiate ultimately as I had lost access to hormones. Just before I dig into all of this, for any newcomers here, my name is Ayla Bell. Welcome. I have been posting videos about my transition journey since 2017. I used to go by the moniker Ayla Mode. I first used that because I was afraid of any backlash that might ultimately come to my family and just wanted to create some distance there for their sake. Ultimately though, I didn't feel that that was necessary, and that whole front seemed a little inauthentic, so I've been rebranding to Ayla Bell. Now, getting back to why we are here in the first place, detransition. It all started with me moving to Australia in 2021. Some of you may know this as I had documented some of that in the YouTube channel and another YouTube channel as well. Ultimately, I went to Australia during COVID to be with a partner. Now, that wasn't a decision made lightly. There was a lot of research and planning that ultimately had to go into that. I needed paperwork from doctors here, as well as making sure that I had a doctor set up there and that the medications I'm on could be acquired down there. When I got to Australia, I was able to get injection estrogen, otherwise known as estradiol valerate here in Canada, but it's a very rare form of estrogen in Australia. They really don't like that. They'd rather use an implant, which is like a machine in your arm that slowly deposits the medication over time. So common down there that it's often used for women even with birth control. I didn't feel very comfortable with that. We don't really have that here in Canada. Anyhow, I got set up with my doctor. I got set up with the pharmacy without a hitch, and everything went great. I then needed to go out into the outback to do tree planting as a part of my visa requirements. While I was in the outback, COVID hit Australia for the first time. What this ultimately meant is lockdowns, restrictions, much like the rest of the world saw. And I didn't realize this, but somewhere in that period, the doctor I had went on maternity leave. There was no real communication around it, so I don't have a very clear idea as to when this happened, but it happened. Now, there was a one-time occurrence that the pharmacy was allowed to provide me with a refill because this was an unprecedented case. Like COVID was new for everyone, and they normally wouldn't be able to give refills, but they did. I wasn't aware that that's what the situation was, but again, that was what ended up happening yet again. So when I finished my time in the outback and finally moved to Sydney to readjust, I wasn't quite in Sydney, but when I was readjusting to city life, I wasn't quite aware of all the parameters and exceptions that had been made leading up to this point. Now, when my refills needed to be put through again was just before Christmas, and I wasn't in the awareness that a number of exceptions have been made in this period. So when I reached out for my refills, the pharmacy said that they hadn't got a script from the doctor and that I needed to contact them. I reached out to the doctor's office to discover for the first time that the doctor was on maternity leave, and it was then informed to me at this point that not only was the doctor on maternity leave, but the nurse that had answered that phone that day was quite abrupt and rude with me, and apparently a student. But they had said something along the lines of, "It is not our fault if the pharmacy is unorganized and can't find what we've sent them. That's on you to figure out." And I explained to them that if I couldn't get a script to the pharmacy, that these life-altering medications, life-saving medications that I am on, would not legally be provided to me, that I needed cooperation from the doctor's office. I was ultimately left in tears that day, and I just felt like they weren't willing to cooperate, so much so to the point where they kind of just hung up on me. Thankfully, shortly after, a head nurse or lead nurse, someone who was more tenured and aware of my situation, had called back and profusely apologized and said that they were going to do anything they could to try and rectify the situation, and that that call shouldn't have happened to me. But ultimately, a script did not make it to the pharmacy in time for me to get my medications. And ultimately, I was shy about like a month's worth of medication and had 3 weeks left. So I did a week off of medication, a week on, a week off, a week on. I say weekly because I would do 1 injection a week. This jarring and abrupt change in hormones ultimately led to a number of difficult changes. I was definitely having struggles mentally with the process. My anxiety was heightened. I was having gut issues, weight displacement, body hair regrowing, and just feeling very disconnected from my body. That whole period of time, a number of things were kind of coming to a head, and it led me to feel like I just needed to get back home and I needed to find some level of equilibrium. So by the end of January, I had finally got hormones again and was able to stabilize. I was back in Canada by the end of March. At that point, I went to my doctor right away and I said, I feel like I need to come off of my hormones just to find a homeostasis, some kind of ground level. And as I had stated in my short film, the doctor was honestly very supportive, which surprised me quite a bit. I was very afraid of some sort of blowback, only because you need like therapist letters to get surgeries and stuff here, and I thought by showing any sort of wavering or questioning on my transition that this could potentially affect choices that I might want to make in the future with my transition. But the doctor pretty well said, it's very normal for people who've been taking hormones as long as I have and haven't decided on any surgeries to want to take a step off of the hormones just for a while to figure things out. It doesn't mean that they're not valid. It doesn't mean that they don't that they regret their transition at all. It just means that they've got to figure out where they're going and where they're at. I felt super validated by that because I was honestly feeling very triggered through this whole process about how medically dependent I had become. I had grown up with my mom being quite disabled and severely affected by rheumatoid arthritis over her life. And seeing the challenges she went through was traumatic. Feeling medically dependent just really made me feel vulnerable. I did not want to be in a position even half as bad as my mom went through. As for starting up on the detransition journey, I started in October coming off of the hormones. I was able to just stop abruptly as the doctor informed me, because I have not had any surgeries, that I did not need to worry about any concerns like bone density changes. I'm not recommending to use this information in any way. Look into it further, discuss this with your doctors, and see what's right for you if you are questioning things. Now, because I kind of welcomed the detransition process after it had kind of been forced on me, I think that there might be some kind of glossy rose-tinted glasses type thing with the whole process. I'm not saying it was all a cakewalk, because there was honestly quite a bit of challenges, but I did not have as abrasive an experience as I could have anticipated. I think I was ultimately most worried about a decline in my mental health. I was worried about feeling further disconnected from my body and not being able to sort out my health issues. Ultimately, coming off of hormones the conclusion is that my gut did clear up. I did not have any more issues in my gut. Now that could also possibly be because I was no longer super anxious. I did notice that. My anxiety was at really high levels when I was on estrogen, but again, when the quality of life you're getting and your access to your livelihood is being shaken and taken from you, it is expected that your anxiety is going to be at peak levels. I did start to have issues where I started noticing slowly over the months that I was feeling very disconnected from my body, that I was feeling somewhat unrecognizable to myself, but it wasn't as brutal as I thought it could have been. I did notice like some thinning out of the face around the temples, so like the male typical protrusion around the eyebrows felt very prominent, but I used to have a very gaunt and shaped face before transition, as some of you might know from my earlier videos, and I did not find that ever came back. Now, ultimately, transition did provide me a bunch of weight. I gained 15 to 20 pounds or so over the course of my transition, and also through COVID. And I did not lose all of it entirely, but a good most of it. But I was surprised to see that weight and some level of curve still held to some areas on me more than, again, before I started transition. Body hair definitely came back big time, and definition in musculature is 100% like came back full force. I work in an automotive plant, so a lot of this felt very prominent. I'm sure that doing physical labor assisted with the losing weight and with the definition of muscles. But I also have to say, having such an awesome and supportive group of peers and coworkers really helped kind of curb any kind of discomfort or connection that I had with my body. Ultimately, I am glad that I had made the choice to detransition. It was the right choice for me. Again, I'm not suggesting it to anyone or recommending it, but it was something that I needed to do. I have opted to go back on hormones and have been doing so for a month and a bit. I am not noticing any effects to my mental health. Obviously, there's like the puberty changes where, you know, there's some level of stress and emotional up and downs, but they are more momentary than long lasting. So like weather pattern instead of like climate. I did have a really abrupt and random solid cry at the grocery store today. So yes, there's definite signs that the hormones are picking up and doing their thing once more. As for what the future holds, we'll see. If I start having issues with my health again, we'll see what that means for me with the hormones. Honestly, I think a big part of it was just hormones going up and down. I'm sure many women who experience erratic use with birth control can also attest to just how much it affects your body to be up and down the levels so irregularly. So I think as long as I can continue and maintain regular access to my hormones, that I should be okay. I'm glad that I have some information in my back pocket from my doctor as to how to feel safe with my body and what should happen again if I run out of hormones. Ultimately, I think the big thing is just returning to that lesson that detransition taught me that I am valid and I am who I am, not because of medication. I think that is the biggest takeaway and something that was really huge for me to learn, and I really hope can help someone else, because a lot of where I felt seen, validated, or supported was from trans peers through YouTube like this. I'm sure, especially with all the erratic laws that have been flying through Congress in the United States of America this past year, that there are other people who are losing access to hormones not sure about what the future has for them, and feeling very lost, forgotten, falling through the cracks. And I want trans people out there to know that whether or not you can access your hormones, you are real, you are valid, you are loved, and you are seen. And I am here, and I get it. Yes, maybe I'm back in Canada where I can access hormones, and I'm speaking from a bit of like a place of privilege, but I was in a position where I fell through the cracks, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And in that moment where I was yet to reach that light, it wasn't the end of the world for me. I understand that, again, this is a personal experience, that everyone's situations are going to be very different, that people's mental health can be extremely dependent on this level of access, or people feeling like their safety. So even if you feel comfortable with yourself, just feeling like you're safe, that access to medications like this are extremely vital. So I'm not trying to wash anyone's experiences away or say, hey, I was able to make it through, so you should too. I'm not in any way saying that. I just want to make sure that people know that you are valid despite medications. That's really the big takeaway for me. It was something that was huge and monumental for me to learn about my journey, and I'd like to impart that on anyone who is in a place to receive it in this format, if it is for you. I love you, and thank you so much for those of you who have followed me on this journey and continue to support me and just listen and witness my journey as I stumble and figure it out myself. It's definitely not easy, and even, this past year was a lot of insecurity and navigating challenges about who am I and what am I without my medication. And I'm very grateful to be in a place where I can feel valid and recognize that I am so much more than medications. So once again, I love you and thank you for joining me. Until next time.